So I don't know if this was the original plan for Wizards of the Coast, because they usually dole out these previews over the course of a week to several content creators and media outlets. But during an awkward presentation just the other day, the entire Aftermath set for March of the Machine has been revealed, and we can now talk about those cards that were leaked 2 weeks ago. Now, I'm not going to go over all 50 of the cards because that would just take way too long, and not every single one of the cards interests me. So we're just going to go over the cards that give me some interest. Most of them are legends, but there are a few cards that you will find in the 99 or the 60 if you're playing an Oathbreaker. So with that said, let's get into it. The first card that caught my attention, and this we'll see play in Oathbreaker, I am almost 100% certain, is Deification. For 1 and a white, you get an enchantment that says, as it enters, choose a Planeswalker type. Planeswalkers of the chosen type have hexproof, and as long as you control a creature, if damage dealt to a Planeswalker would remove all of its loyalty counters, instead remove all but 1. So, if your Oathbreaker is in the white color identity, you're going to want this. I mean, it's a cheap way to give them hexproof and makes them pretty much unkillable as long as you have at least 1 creature lying around. And that's a pretty powerful effect for the format. And I would also use it in a Super Friends deck that uses white as well during the Commander and Historic Brawl formats. Speaking of Super Friends, next card up we have is Spark Rupture. For 2 and a white, you get an enchantment that says, as it enters, draw a card, and then each Planeswalker with 1 or more loyalty counters on them lose all abilities and is a creature with power and toughness equal to the number of loyalty counters on them. Now, losing the abilities of the walkers is strange, but in a deck built with high loyalty walkers and you're planning on this, you could just drop this in and just beat some wholesale face in with this. Or inversely, you could run this if your playgroup is Super Friends heavy and hose their decks to stop their shenanigans and kill the Planeswalkers with board wipes or single target removal for creatures. Another enchantment here that's gaining a lot of attention for me is Training Grounds. For a blue, you get an enchantment that says, activated abilities of creatures you control cost 2 less to activate. This effect cannot reduce the mana in that cost to less than 1 mana. All I gotta say is, it's about damn time. This card has needed a reprint for years, and I gave up on ever owning a copy because it's been $30+ for a long time, and I don't usually spend that kind of money on a Magic card. Well, it's already begun declining since the leak happened a couple weeks ago, and we could feasibly see this hit $10 or less before too long. I originally wanted this for my Locust God deck, but there are so many other commanders that might actually want this card that are in the more modern printings, such as Urza, Prince of Krug, the new Jin Gitaxias, Rona, Herald of Invasion, and just about any creature with an activated ability costing mana as long as you're in the blue color identity. This is an A+ reprint. I must be on an enchantment kick because the next card is also an enchantment, but this one's an aura. It's Leyline Immersion. For 3 and a green, you get an enchantment aura, enchant legendary creature. The enchanted creature has ward 2 and tap. Add 5 mana of any combination of colors. Only spend this mana to cast spells. So in generic terms, this is a really pricey way to give our legendary creatures ward 2. But it also lets us color fix in 3+ color decks using green, such as Omnath Locus of All that I just played recently. Or someone pointed out to me, Joda Archmage Eternal, creating a self-sustained Wooburg generator to spam spells off of Joda's own ability. This is actually kind of fun. Keeping on this enchantment kick, we have Calyx, Guided by Fate. This is one of the Planeswalkers who were desparked and became a creature. For 1 green-white, you get a Human Druid. It's a 2/2 with Constellation, which means when an enchantment enters, it gets a trigger. Put a +1/+1 counter on target creature. And it has, whenever Calyx or an enchanted creature you control deals combat damage to a player, you may create a token copy of a non-legendary enchantment you control. Do this only once each turn. Enchantress lovers rejoice, for you now have another option besides Sithis Harvest Hand to be your commander. And this actually gives you copies of other non-legendary enchantments as you hit your opponents with Calyx or your other enchanted creatures, which then gives you a Constellation trigger to put counters around, and then gives you other things to go ahead and copy. I, for one, would love to copy something like a Doubling Season, which affects both halves of Calyx's abilities, or an Anointed Procession to get more token copies of the enchantments we're copying. This could snowball out of control really fast. Another new legend that's coming in that actually goes hand in hand with Calyx is Danatha, New Benalia'S Light. For 1 green-white, you get a 2/2 Human Knight with Vigilance, Trample, and Lifelink that says during each of your turns, you may cast an aura or an equipment spell from your graveyard. So Calyx has this new running mate to go along with him, and auras have always had the drawback of letting you get 2 for 1 with a removal spell. Well, Danatha here helps make that drawback sting a little less by letting you get some of the auras back that you've lost, and then it ties back into Calyx's triggering abilities with the enchanted creatures dealing damage, so you get to make the copies, you get to spread the counters around. I like this little package altogether, and I will be trying them together. Danatha could also find home in a Mazzy deck, since that deck relies so heavily on auras. Next up is Nahiri Forged in Fury. For 4 red-white, you get a Core Artificer, a 5/4 with Affinity for Equipment, which means it costs 1 less for each equipment you control. And whenever an equipped creature you control attacks, exile the top card of your library. You can play that card this turn. You may cast equipment spells this way without paying their mana cost. So have we finally gotten the equipment-centric commander that can push the theme of equipment to better results? Quite possibly. Equipment-focused decks in general are just usually very hit or miss. You either go off and it goes big, or you just sputter out because you've either drawn too much equipment, not enough equipment, or they just blow up whatever you have equipped and then you sputter out. This Nahiri gets cheaper with every equipment that we play in advance of her being cast, including the equipment creatures from Neon Dynasty, and generates card advantage by attacking with the equipped creatures, netting you a card sent to exile for each one attacking, and then you get any new equipments for free off of this as well. I generally don't like equipment decks, but I think I'm going to be willing to give this one a try. Next, I think we finally have a fair variation of Narset. We have Narset Enlightened Exile. For 1, a blue, a red, and a white, you get a 3/4 human monk. Creatures you control have prowess, which means that anytime you cast a non-creature spell, you get +1/+1 until end of turn. And whenever Narset Enlightened Exile attacks, exile target non-creature, non-land card with mana value less than Narset's power from a graveyard. Copy it, and you can cast the copy without paying its mana cost. So you can kind of preliminarily set it up to cast a spell, and then when she attacks, you can exile and recast the spell to make her even bigger and badder as things go along. I think pump spells are going to play really well with her, because you're going to be able to pump and then swing and then pump again, especially with something with trample. Think Teamer Battle Rage or something of that nature. And I just love that we now have a prowess commander that gives our non-prowess creatures prowess. So you can get some of the better creatures that just kind of like, oh, okay, they support prowess creatures, but they're not that great. But now they too can have the prowess. And you couple that with some of the recent reprints like Monastery Mentor and several new cards like Kenra Spell Spear. There's a deck here, and I think it will surprise kill an opponent with a barrage of spell slinging really quick. Well, I just did a 5-color commander, and I have another one built, but this one might be my third one up to bat. It's Niv-Mizzet Supreme. For Wooburg, we get a Dragon Avatar, a 5/5 flyer with hexproof from Monocolored, and has each instant and sorcery in your graveyard that is exactly 2 colors has Jumpstart. Jumpstart means you have to discard a card and pay the cost of the spell, and you get to flash it back from your graveyard, and then it's exiled. So this is a commander that is immune to targeted removal spells, and that's pretty spicy since most of them are monocolored spells. Your opponent's really going to need to have something like a Terminate in their deck to blow up this, or they're going to just have to rely on board wipes alone to get him off the board. On top of simply being a hard-to-deal-with beater at a 5/5 flyer, this Niv also lets us jumpstart all these spells that we're doing in all of our instances as long as they're 2 colors. That restriction is a little difficult to meet, but this could be fun to try to build around as a challenge to build enough of these multicolored spells in to really get excellent mileage out of them by jumpstarting them back and using them over. Next up is probably the card I'm most excited to try to build something around. It's Obnixilis Captive Kingpin. For 2, a black and a red, you get a 4/3 demon with flying and trample that says whenever one or more opponents each lose exactly 1 life, put a +1/+1 counter on Obnixilis Captive Kingpin. Exile the top card of your library, and then until the end of your next end step, you can play the card. Poor Ob. This guy spent years trapped on Zendikar without his spark because he got turned into a demon by Nahiri jamming a Hedron into his chest, and now he's trapped on New Capenna without a spark once again. This variation kind of harkens back to those older versions of him as a demon on Zendikar where creatures dying put counters on him, or landfall triggers would do the same kind of thing. But this one I would say is probably almost custom made for what Rakdos decks have been doing now for the last few years, which is all about pinging your opponent's aristocrat style. We got Mayhem Devil, we got Devil tokens that deal damage on death, we have these Blood Artist, Zulaport Cutthroats, all these little ping things going on, Oni Cult Anvil, just all these things that go drain you for 1, hit you for 1, all these things are going on, and they're gonna put a counter on Obnixilis, and he is going to get really, really big, and I think it's gonna happen really fast. If you're already in an Rakdos Aristocrats deck, this slots in really nicely as the commander, and we also have an infinite combo available to us on Arena for Historic Brawl and in the Commander format, where you just play all will be one. With 1 ping, it goes infinite. Ob gets a counter. You shoot your opponent in the face. All the way one will go off and put a counter on. It just chains out of control. And if that happens, the board is dead. If the demon's not your jam, Sarkhan's Soul of Flame might be. For 1, a blue, and a red, you get a 2/4 human shaman that says dragon spells cost 1 less to cast, and whenever a dragon enters the battlefield under your control, you can have Sarkhan become a copy of it until end of turn, except for its name is Sarkhan's Soul of Flame, and it is a legendary in addition to its other types. This has some potential, especially in Commander where commander damage exists. You basically get a double up of your dragons when they come into play, and you can even get a temporary clone of a legendary dragon since Sarkhan keeps his name, so the legend rule doesn't kill the Sarkhan or the new dragon coming into play. So imagine something like this, where you drop Drakaseth, and then Sarkhan becomes a copy of Drakaseth, but it's Sarkhan, and he can swing because he's been sitting there already. He's already passed his haste phase, and then dishing out all those extra attack triggers, and then you have a second Drakaseth sitting there to swing again and have those attack triggers again. And if you have haste available for that Drakaseth, you will have 2 7/7s that deal 4 direct damage off of each one of them, and then 2 additional targets just dishing out the fireballs of pain. The last card that I'm interested from this mini set is Karn Legacy Reforged. For 5 colorless, you get a golem that is a star power and toughness, and it says that his power and toughness are each equal to the greatest mana value among artifacts you control, and at the beginning of your upkeep, add a colorless for each artifact you control to your mana pool. The mana cannot be spent on non-artifact spells, and until the end of turn, you don't lose the mana as the steps and phases end. So Karn is finally back in creature form after losing his spark and has become a pretty massive beater in the process. He's also got an interesting mana ability to give you colorless mana equal to your artifact count, so you can cast even bigger artifacts in rapid pace. So I think we're seeing a reasonably priced colorless commander that's not just stuck being a little piddly thing like Liberator is when it comes out, and we don't have to wait until 10, 11, 12 mana to drop an Eldrazi Titan to have ourselves a colorless deck. As I said, that is not all 50 cards. These are just the ones that interest me the most and that you're going to likely see on the channel in one shape or the other in some of my decks, whether leading the decks or in the 99 of the Historic Brawl decks or in some of my deck lists that I put out on occasion. With that said, if you have something that you like that I didn't have on the list, let me know in the comments below. And as always, thank you for watching and have a great day.